I want to start again just by celebrating this wonderful little book and by thanking you, Fritz, Yeti, and Victoria for publishing it, for editing it, for doing this tremendous amount of work of pulling together so many wonderful, profound practices and perspectives. So thank you, and it's a real honor to be included in this with my colleague Sietske. So I'd like to share some reflections with you about this practice of mindful communication as I understand and practice it, with the understanding that I think what we're doing in mindful communication is a very natural thing for us as human beings, and that there are many ways to arrive at and practice bringing awareness into our communication. So I want to start by offering a definition of communication and then of mindful communication. So what is this thing we do as human beings of speaking, listening, sending messages to one another? So all life communicates in some way, right? We know that even trees and plants will communicate with each other. I define communication as sending and receiving a message. So communication is about creating understanding. When a message that's sent is received accurately, understanding arises, and we have communicated. Mindful communication is enhancing that process with awareness. It's deliberately cultivating awareness to support the flow of understanding in our lives and in our relationships. So how do we do that? And how do we communicate more effectively? I think this question itself is one of the most important questions we can be asking as a species right now. Whether we're looking at the multiple wars unfolding around the world in the Middle East, in the Ukraine, in the Sudan, whether we're looking at the overwhelming climate crisis that's upon us, whether we are considering the increasing divide in politics around the world and the rise of right-wing fundamentalism. How do we communicate better as human beings? How do we find a way to get our message across to one another in a way that we can hear and in a way that conveys what's true in our heart? This is the only way forward that I see, is to be able to do that more and more effectively. So when we ask this question, how do we communicate more effectively? We need to look at the conditions. What are the conditions that support us to do that? And what I've found through my own practice, my own life, and my own training, both in Buddhist meditation, mindfulness, and nonviolent communication, is that there's several areas of training we can undertake in order to support the conditions for having more effective conversations. So there are three foundations, three areas of training in mindful communication as I understand and teach it. I'll say what these are, and then I'll say a few words about each and offer some examples and practices that you can experiment with in your own life. So the first is training ourselves in being present. This is the fundamental skill of mindfulness, of cultivating our innate capacity to be here in a balanced, non-reactive, and curious way as human beings. The second is to train ourselves to choose more helpful and clear intentions in our communication so that we're aware of where we're coming from and ensuring that that's going to support understanding rather than work against it. So presence, intention, and last, our attention. How are we paying attention? What are we focusing on? And this is one of the most overlooked skills and capacities I think that we have as human beings is the choice of where to place our attention. So in communication and relationships, are we able to focus on what matters? And this is where the training of nonviolent communication comes in, which I'll say some more about. So let's take each of these one at a time. Training ourselves in presence. I invite people to learn how to lead with presence. This means that before anything else in a conversation, before what we want to say, how we feel, what happened, the outcome we're looking for, can we just show up? Can we just be here with the other person fully? Not planning what we're going to say next, not angling to get an advantage, but actually just showing up and negotiating what it is to be in contact and relationship with another human being. This is the prerequisite for having an effective conversation. It doesn't guarantee that we're going to be able to hear and understand each other, but without this, it's impossible to hear each other, because when we're not present, we're on automatic. We are operating from habit and living within the filters and bias of our own world. As soon as we become present, we open the door to connection, to really beginning to see each other, to becoming aware of our biases, to having the potential to step outside of them. And we can feel it. We can feel it when someone is really present with us. We know what it feels like to have someone give us their full attention, how nourishing that can be, how healing it can be, how reassuring it can be. And we can feel it when someone's not present, whether they're looking at their device, it's quite obvious, or if they're thinking about something else, waiting to get out of the conversation, not really interested. Someone can be looking you right in the eyes, and we can feel it if they're not actually present. We are that attuned as human beings. So, how do we lead with presence? How do we translate the skill of internal mindfulness that Fritz was speaking of earlier into the space of our relationships and the rest of our life? It takes practice. Just as it takes practice to cultivate mindfulness internally, whether through meditation, art, or movement, or many other vehicles, it takes practice to bring mindfulness into the space of our relationships and conversations. So this is a really essential insight, I think, to recognize first that we can be more present in our conversations and relationships, and second, that it takes practice. That because of so many conditions and habits and pressure in our world today, the pace of our life, the influence of technology, the distractedness, the fragmentation of our attention, trauma personally, intergenerationally, it can be difficult to be present. So we need to work at it. So there are many ways to do this. Some of my most favorite skills or tools for learning how to be more aware in our conversations are things like just paying attention to your body. So even right now, as you're listening, can you feel the weight of your body or the sensations in your hands, even a little bit? Another very powerful tool for establishing and maintaining presence in our conversations is to pause. It doesn't need to be a long pause, just a short enough pause to remember that we're here and that what we say matters, that it has an impact on others, and it has an impact on ourselves, on our own mind and heart, the way we think and speak. When we pause, we can also be more aware of not only what we're saying, but how we're saying it, why we're saying it. And we can begin to bring awareness into the flow of our speech by modulating the pace at which we speak. We speak so automatically, so often. Are we able to stay aware of the very process of forming words and sharing them? It's a very embodied experience. The tongue is moving, the breath, there's vibration. What's it like to experience that flow of energy arising and moving out of your body and offering it into the world? This is possible. So lead with presence. Feel your body. Pause. Slow down. Stay aware as you're speaking, as you're listening. This is the foundation. Everything else flows from that. Without this, good luck. So is this making sense? Okay, great. So when we become aware, a whole nother avenue of practice opens up to us. One of the things that mindfulness reveals is our intention. So I define intention not as the outcome of the conversation. In English, sometimes we use this word intention to mean outcome, like my intention is to get you to increase the budget of my department, or my intention is to have you apologize. That use of the word intention means outcome, my goal. That's not what I mean. When I say intention, I mean our inner motivation. Where are we coming from inside? Are we trying to be right? Are we trying to win? Are we trying to make ourselves look good or defend ourselves? Or are we genuinely curious? Are we wanting to be patient? Are we committed to being honest in a way that's also kind? These are intentions. It's how we communicate. And the how is often more important than the what. Skillful communication's not about the words. It's not about what we say. It's about where we're coming from inside and the quality of understanding or connection that we are able to create with the other person. You can say all sorts of things that are quite off color, and if the other person understands you and it leads to more connection, you're communicating. And you can use kind of perfect communication skills, but still be blaming the other person inside or trying to manipulate them. And guess what? They'll feel it, because we are that intelligent and sensitive relationally and emotionally as human beings. So where we're coming from, our intention matters. When we're mindful, we can start to choose more helpful, clear intentions in our conversations, ones that will support us to work together and get towards our goal, whatever that is. So the default intention that I encourage people to practice, to train themselves to fall back on, is the intention to understand. It's very basic, genuine intention to understand. Sometimes I talk about it as coming from curiosity and care. Why is that so powerful? Why is this so important and helpful? Well, if we think back to what I said about communication, the definition of communication is to create understanding. So what more helpful intention to have than to understand? If that's the currency of communication, having that as our intention will support the process. So there are many ways to cultivate this intention. Oftentimes just remembering, can I get curious? Bringing a certain level of humility to the conversation, checking our assumptions. One of the ways to cultivate a genuine intention to understand has to do with this third and final area of training, of where we place our attention. We can get curious by focusing our attention on our shared humanity, by trying to see, what is it I have in common with this person? Even if I disagree with them, even if they've done things that I abhor, can I find some thread of shared humanity. How do we do that? This is where the training in Dr. Rosenberg's nonviolent communication comes in. So Dr. Marshall Rosenberg was a psychologist here in the United States. He studied with mentors in the humanistic psychology field, folks like Carl Rogers. And within that field, there's a perspective on human nature that says part of what makes us human is that we share certain fundamental underlying needs. And when we can understand and connect at that level, we have more in common than different. So what is a need? In the English language and in the dominant culture here in the United States, there are all kinds of unfortunate cultural associations with the word need. Being needy, being weak, being dependent, being selfish, being demanding. This is not what Dr. Rosenberg or humanistic psychology means when we talk about fundamental, universal human needs. What we're talking about are core motivating factors. Just as these plants behind me will turn towards light, the human heart will orient towards fulfilling underlying needs. So we have basic physiological needs: food, water, air, shelter, medicine. We have relational needs: respect, empathy, understanding, joy, love, play. We have what we might call higher needs, sometimes referred to as spiritual needs. These are needs that are immaterial for things like creativity, dignity, meaning, sense of connection to something larger than ourselves, a sense of place in the world and the universe. Now, the key distinction here that nonviolent communication makes is between these underlying fundamental needs and our strategies, our ideas for how to meet those needs. Our strategies differ vastly as human beings, and that is the level at which our conflicts tend to occur. When we get down to the level of needs, we can be more creative about how to meet those needs. So I want to give you an example, a concrete example of this. Here in the United States in the 1990s, in Massachusetts, there was a shooting at an abortion clinic, a reproductive health care clinic in Massachusetts on the East Coast. Several people were killed and injured, and tension was very high in this community. There were marches and demonstrations, and people on both sides of the issue were understandably really inflamed and angry, shouting at each other across the demonstrations. A group of women therapists recognized that we're not going to get anywhere by demonizing each other and shouting at each other. Obviously, this story has larger implications for the events that are unfolding right now in our world. They decided to create a project for having conversation called the Public Conversations Project. And they brought together a number of women leaders from each camp, from each side on the issue of reproductive health rights. And they started to get to know each other, to have conversations, not just about their views, the strategies, but about the underlying values, the needs beneath those views. And they learned about each other's families, each other's histories. The outcome of that project was very interesting to me. None of the women changed their views. Nobody migrated to the other side. But what happened was, when anyone got word of somebody coming to the community aiming to stir up more violence, to bomb a clinic. They sent a message through the network, you are not welcome here. We're trying to reduce polarization, not increase it. That's not how we do things here. I see that as a success. Because of the process of humanizing one another, not by agreeing, but by understanding the real values and legitimate needs underneath their positions, they were able to take a stand and say, we're not willing to use violence anymore to attain our ends, to meet our needs. That strategy is off the table. So training our attention to focus on what matters. What are the actual needs present for myself, for someone else? This is a way to get curious. To train our attention to shift from our judgments, our ideas, from our fixation on the past, to what does this person need? What do I need? How do we speak about that in a way that we can recognize in one another? So this is the heart of nonviolent communication. There's a training template that Dr. Rosenberg developed that helps us shift our attention and learn to speak and listen in ways that are more conducive to understanding. And this is the template that Sitka and I talk about in the book and provide practices for. And it's learning to focus on 4 different areas of our experience as human beings. And the first is being able to make clear observations of what happened, distinct from our interpretations, judgments, and evaluations. So a colleague of mine was driving in the car with her mom. They're having a conversation. And several times my colleague brings up a certain topic, and there's a moment of quiet, and then their mother changes the subject and responds on a completely different topic. This happened 3 or 4 times. My colleague was starting to get very upset. Why are you ignoring me? Is the thought, is the interpretation of what's happening. But because they were trained in nonviolent communication, they had enough awareness to make an observation, to see the difference between the story they were telling themselves, you don't care, you're ignoring me, from the actual observation. I said something, and then she said something totally unrelated 3 or 4 times. And my colleague asked, they made an observation. They said, hey, I notice that the last few times I've brought something up in the conversation, you've responded on a completely different topic. And I'm confused about what's going on. Is that intentional? Turns out their mother was starting to lose their hearing and actually just hadn't heard what they said. Now, had my colleague not made an observation, not even been aware that they were making an interpretation, had they taken their interpretation as reality, you don't care, you're ignoring me, would have been a very different conversation, probably a fight. And it could have taken a long time before they actually discovered what was going on. So, can we make clear and direct observations? Can we use mindfulness to parse the difference between what we actually know and what we're telling ourselves? This is the first step of training our attention, focusing on observations. Then being able to identify the feelings, the emotions that are present in ourselves or in someone else. And there's a similar process of training our attention here. To start to recognize that the way we think about our emotions often attributes blame or intention to the other person. You betrayed me. You're ignoring me. I feel abandoned. I feel judged. I feel attacked. All of these words suggest something you're doing to me. How many people here today have ever felt judged? All right, so almost everyone's hand is going up. So clearly there is an emotional experience we are having that we share here, right? It's not that there's no such thing as being judged. Right? That exists. But the question is, when you're telling yourself, I feel judged, how do you actually feel? Notice that I feel judged is an interpretation of what the other person is doing to you. It's not an emotion. It's pointing to emotions, but it doesn't actually articulate the emotion you're having, which means a lot of the time we're not even fully aware of how we're feeling. So when you tell yourself, I feel judged, do you feel angry, confused, frustrated, defensive, scared? The whole range of things you might be feeling on the inside. So this is empowering. If I tell myself I feel judged, my only recourse is to try to change your behavior because you're the one making the problem. But if I'm aware that I feel confused, the center of the experience is now back here. I'm aware of how I'm feeling. This is happening in me, and I can take steps to address it. So identifying our feelings takes our power back. And it allows us to communicate what's happening in a way that the other person is probably going to find easier to hear. If I tell you I feel judged, you might defend yourself. I'm not judging you. What are you talking about? If I tell you that I'm confused and feeling a little bit defensive, there's nothing to argue with because I'm just telling you how I feel. So this creates a space for a different kind of conversation. We can apply this skill to how we listen. So when someone else tells us that they feel judged, we don't need to hear what their mind is saying. We can focus on what matters and hear what their heart is saying. Some needs aren't being met. There's some difficult emotions coming up. So an observation, a feeling, and then our needs, what matters. In nonviolent communication, our feelings are information that point to our needs. When our needs are met, we feel pleasant emotions. When our needs are not met, we feel unpleasant emotions. So our feelings become information that point to deeper underlying values. If you didn't care about something, you wouldn't be feeling any emotions about it. So if we're having emotions, most of the time it means that there is some need present, either being met or not met. So can we identify what that is? Can we be aware of it? As we become aware of our needs, we have more options to address them. Even when the external options are limited, we can honor our needs by feeling them, by being in relationship to them. My heart breaks for what's unfolding in Israel and Palestine right now. My need for peace, for dignity, for respect, for safety, for my people and for the people in that region are not being met. And I feel helpless to do anything about it. I can and have reached out to my government. I can and have written about it. And still, those needs are not met. But I can be aware of them. I can honor them. I can stay connected to them. And that's something. That helps me feel more whole. It helps me to stay connected to my humanity. So even when our options for meeting our needs externally is constrained by circumstances, we still have the power to be in relationship to our needs, to hold them with care and respect. The last piece of the model is to be able to make clear requests, to offer strategies, ideas for how to move forward, rather than trying to exert force to get our way, which always comes at a cost, whether it's a cost in trust in the relationship, a cost in the quality of the outcome, or accost down the road in revenge. Applying force to meet our needs is not free. If we can communicate our needs and propose solutions that aim to honor as many needs as present, we can forge new ways forward. This is the art of making requests, of suggesting moment to moment how to move forward in a conversation, how to hear each other, how to understand each other, and eventually how to find creative strategies. So the training in nonviolent communication that I've just gone through is these 4 components: an observation, a feeling, a need, and a request. This is not a script. This is not something we read from. This is a method of training our awareness to be connected to these aspects of our experience so that we can speak from the heart and hear what's true for someone else. So we all have our challenges in our lives, personally and collectively. We all have certain barriers to making changes. And those can run deep, particularly with our communication, because we have been molded and shaped by our life experiences, by our family, by our religion, by our society, culture, the media. It's not easy to change those patterns. But because they are learned, they can be unlearned. Language is a learned skill. So we internalized some things that were helpful and probably a lot of things that were not helpful. The more aware we become, the more we lead with presence, the more we start to notice what's working and what's not working. And through this training, we can begin to shift the patterns. We can start to apply more awareness, more intention, more focus on what matters. And if we make just 1 or 2 small changes in our communication, that can have a far-reaching effect over time. So one of the things I always like to do whenever I speak about this stuff is to invite you to just think about what's one thing that you've heard today that makes sense to you, that you want to integrate into your life. And make a mental note of it. Say, I want to do that. That makes sense. And then practice it every day. Remind yourself until it becomes your new habit, a healthy habit, and you don't have to work at it anymore. And then choose another one. And like this, slowly, 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 we change the course of history.